All right, well then I guess I'm going to get started. So, this actually isn't going to be as long as last week was. We're going to be going over some of the stuff about how to actually use the Clarion Library. We'll look at a couple of demos. Depending on how we feel at the end, we may try for a couple of other demos which show a few extra things. But this is going to give you kind of a beginning introduction to the code library, couple of samples, and we'll probably get all the way up into kind of beginning how to use systems other than just the ACS. But of course, we're going to start off with just using the ACS. We'll look at how to get things set up, how to start up, do a project, etc. So,
sorry, real quick.
Yeah.
The template you're passing around, if we already downloaded the Clarion Library from the website, do we just copy over the DLL? Or
yeah, just copy over well, actually copy over all three. I don't think there's any differences in the three demo samples that I put in that, but just in case,
okay.
Because there was some slight changes in terms of there were some slight wording changes and things like that between the version that's on the website and the version that's passing around. The version on the currently on the website is 2.1.0.7. The one that's being passed around is .8. So, okay. So, one of the first things, let me just show everybody. This is the public page for the Clarion Cognitive Architecture Project. It's your general page to go to for announcements for new code releases. After these presentations, in this presentation, you'll be able to find the tutorial slides. You'll also be able to find links to what we're filming here. So that will be on following when we get all of this done and edited. If you come over here, you can go to the downloads. There'll be a brief thing about what's in the most current release. And then the most current release will always be right here. And the previous releases will all be down in the previous versions section. More extensive release notes and release notes for each of the different versions can be found into the release notes. Then let me go to the forums here. Now the support forums and everything, the way you connect to these is by logging in. These are embedded Google message boards. So you have to basically just ask for permission on the message board. But then you can come here to post questions if you have any questions. You can make requests for features, and you can do some bug tracking. Look and see if there's any bugs. If you are having a bug, you can post it here, and I'll get back to you. But consider these to just be basic forums you can use to communicate. You can also email, of course, and that email address. We don't want this tab. Let me go back to the email address is. Now, why has this gone to? Is clarion.support@gmail.com. If you want to send an email asking questions, that's the other useful way of getting a hold of somebody. So,
who is that? Just because
it's me at the moment, but it could be in future. It could be either me or Shane or Emily.
Okay. So I need my
Or if the group gets bigger, it could end up being other people as well.
Okay.
But
so I shouldn't send my gossip about Shane to that email address, for instance.
you probably shouldn't, add it on to any
Okay.
mailing lists. Yeah, no, it's generally just for questions. Okay. So, coming back over here. How this doesn't keep zoom. Alright, so one of the big questions we had last week. So first, what is the Clarion Library? The Clarion Library is the implementation of the Clarion cognitive architecture. It's a true modern hybrid cognitive architecture, and I also like to call it a next generation cognitive architecture, if you will. What we ask first is, to have a basic understanding of the Clarion theory, which we detailed last week in our tutorials, and then also to have a basic understanding of object-oriented programming languages, such as Java, C++, or C#. So one of the questions we had last week was, well, why did we choose C# over Java? So I provide a brief overview, and this overview was current at least to version 7, I believe, of Java. So beginning with 6.1, the library is now written in C#. There is the old Java library that you can find on that website, although it's no longer being supported in any way or shape or form. So you should use the C#. You may ask, why switch to C#? So we had several reasons why we abandoned Java and switched to C#. So the first thing is that C# has a lot of features and capabilities within, starting with C# version 4.0, that we were able to leverage in creating some of the advanced capabilities of version 6.1 of the Clarion Library. A few examples of those are things like delegates or anonymous lambda functions, dynamic bindings, an enhanced event mechanism, simple and straightforward serialization, and of course link, which is a fun feature of C#, which I definitely advise people to go and look into. And you'll see as we're going through some of the demos, maybe not today, maybe in the next one, some of the kind of neat capabilities of link. The thing I wanted to point out is that while the differences between C# and Java are extensive, both of those are actually ECMA and ISO standard languages. So that means that you don't have to worry about the evil monopoly of Microsoft, taking full control over C#. C# is able to be developed perfectly well on other operating systems, so it's not just a Windows programming language. The main way of doing it outside of the Microsoft Visual Studio developing environment is through a thing called the Mono project, and that can be found at mono-project.com. That brings you here where you can go and you can download both the runtime environment itself in OpenSUSE, Mac OS X, Windows Solaris, and several different Linux builds. And then also you can download, and let me see if it just has it under, hopefully that doesn't just begin a download. The other thing you can go is from here is you can click on the link to Mono Develop, and Mono Develop is the software development kit or the software coding environment where you can download the front end for Mono. Today we'll be looking at both how to work within Mono Develop and as well as how to work in Visual Studio. Visual Studio, of course, there is also a free version, although it's only available for Windows, and that's called Visual Studio Express. I haven't had a chance yet to try out the Clarion Library or any of this in Visual Studio 2012. So the demos today are all going to be in 2011, the Visual Studio But I don't think there's any compatibility issues between the development environments. And certainly the code has been compiled and works, I believe, with version 4.5, or the code version 4.5, which is expressed within, I don't remember which .NET framework, but the newest .NET framework downloads, your programs are still going to work. So the other thing to point out, so for people who are really interested in the debate between the superiority of the various programming languages, there's a great there's a great page on Wikipedia, which is called Comparison of C# to Java, which goes into fairly extensive details about the differences between C# and Java. And you'll see as you start going through them, when they do their lists, there's lots of times where Java doesn't do things that C# does do. And so most of the time when I talk to people who have worked with one or the other, they'll end up liking C# after they've had a chance to use it. So we highly recommend to use it. So the next thing I want to talk about is a couple of features of the library itself. So what is Clarion? I had a question from somebody last week that was asking whether or not you can use a DLL within anything but Windows. Yes, a DLL is simply a dynamic link library. It's your basic package of methods and package of methods and classes that you can use within your own coding environment to develop executable code. So Clarion itself is not an executable piece of code. It is simply a library. This is the same term as a package within Java. The basic structure of it within C#, the parts of the library are broken up into what are called namespaces. I believe that's, I'm not sure, I don't remember exactly what that is in Java.
Packages?
Well, no, packages would be the same as the DLL, or an assembly is what it's called in C#.
Okay.
So maybe it's also a namespace.
I think those would be equivalent.
In Java, yeah. So it's broken up into the basic namespace, Clarion namespace, a Clarion.framework namespace, a plugins namespace, samples, and then a couple of other sub namespaces. A quick description. So what we'll see is that kind of your most essential pieces are in Clarion and Clarion.framework. And then if you go further on into coding, you may need to add the core or the extensions or templates namespace, possibly the plugins namespace, and eventually you'll have to get down into the core namespace if you really start getting into advanced features. But for the most part, you should just be able to do a lot of your coding within these first two namespaces. Let me back out really quick. When you go online and you download the Clarion library comes in a zip file. This zip file contains the following information. Right now we are we're looking at the Getting Started guide. So this exact document can be found within that package. You'll also find the DLL, or the assembly, or the library. You'll find an IntelliSense XML file. This will help you when you're within your code to be able to pull up XML-based documentation for the various methods or classes. So if you're trying to figure out how to use something, that IntelliSense file will allow you to get those inline information when you're just hovering over something. That's especially within Visual Studio, although I believe you can load in an IntelliSense XML file into Mono as well. The other thing you'll find is tutorials. So there's a tutorials folder which will contain a bunch of guides, kind of like this one, for configuring and customizing various aspects of the library. Those tutorials are a work in progress, just like the documentation is a work in progress. So you may find that certain things that you're looking for could be missing or haven't been filled in yet. If you run into one of those problems or you need further clarifications, your best thing to do is to either post on the forum or to go on to the, or to send an email. So you also find a bunch of samples. So those are broken down into basic, intermediate, and advanced simulation samples. These are actually very useful for kind of acting as frameworks for you to extend off of into your own projects. I know a lot of people like to use them as kind of templates or groundworks. And then a documentation folder which contains MSDN-like API reference documentation. So, moving on now. The next thing I want to talk about is the basic guidelines. So, one of the things we really stress when you're working with the Clarion Library is that there is no real requirements for setting up a simulation. There certainly are some requirements for setting up an agent, but if you have any prior experience with developing simulations using cognitive architectures, usually you realize that these things can quickly become very difficult to maintain in a strict format. So the Clarion Library is resisted imposing rigid guidelines, but there is a basic structure. And the basic structure is that first you describe the features and the objects that are within the world. So first you define what the world looks like. Then you define the actions and motivations or goals that dictate how agents interact with the world. After that, you initialize the agents, their internal functions, so that they can make action decisions based on how they perceive the world. And then you provide a mechanism to enable the agents to interact with that world. And that's usually your actual task itself. So the first three steps of this are the initialization, and then the last part is actually developing the task that your agent will be running. So those are the basic guidelines. The next thing to get into is one of the fundamental distinctions that are made within the library. And that is a distinction between what we call descriptive and functional objects. So descriptive objects are objects that are used to describe the features of things. So what the simulating environment looks like, the agents themselves, what actions the agents use, the goals, any type of declarative chunk-like knowledge, etc. So, where is my next page? Here it is. There we go. All of those things, all of those descriptive objects are initialized in this singleton object, which we call the world. So the world is a singleton object in that it already exists by the time your code starts running. It's a statically defined object, and it's always available for you to access. So you need to know that all of your interactions with the worlds are done statically. So like this. So this is an example of how we would create a dimension value pair within our code. Thinking about it conceptually, the world essentially contains everything. So the entire environment of your task, the agents that exist within that environment, and any special internal information pertaining to an agent. Functional objects, on the other hand, are objects within an agent. So they actually do something. That's why they're functional. All right? In other words, the functional objects are used to describe the processes and the mechanisms that make up the inner workings of an agent. In general, we refer to functional objects as components or modules. And those components and modules include things like your implicit decision networks, so the things at the bottom level of your ACS, your action rules, your drives, metacognitive modules. All of those things are all specified within a thing which we call the agent initializer. So the two main classes that you find within the very high level Clarion namespace is the world and the agent initializer. And most of your interactions with the Clarion library will go between the world and the agent initializer. That's the basic part, or the basic foundational knowledge or overlying knowledge that we need to know before we actually get started with using the code. Are there any questions at this point, or are you guys just ready to see what it looks like and how it works?